Hey guys, it's Sandro here, and welcome to part 3 in the paint correction stage of the detail on this rare Nissan Pulsar VZR N1 Spec 2. So, following from the thorough and intensive wash and decontamination stage, the first step in preparing the vehicle for correction was an IPA wipe down. You should really perform this wipe down on all the paint and trims, and it's really just a matter of spraying your cleaner in, using a first cloth to wipe it in and then a second cloth to buff it streak free. Using an isopropyl alcohol dilution like MV Clarity is all about removing lingering chemical residue, water streaks, smudges and dust so that the paint and trims are truly clean and bare before moving on to the next correction process. It's only after you truly strip a car down to clean bare paint and put it into some good lighting that you can really assess its condition and start to understand the sort of defects that you're going to have to address. Right off the bat, a thick, uniform and consistent layer of swirls is definitely the most obvious type of defect on the paint. Almost just as bad is a lot of water and potentially bird poo etchings that are widespread all over the paint, and honestly a lot worse than I'd expect with all things considered. I can see some definite holograms in quite a few places due to some aggressive compounding in the past, and a layer of oxidation that styled and hazed the paint, which is also quite obvious. Apart from that, and as you'll see more of as we progress, there's lots of reds or random isolated deeper scratches on most panels, quite a few scuffs here and there, and some pigtail sanding scratches from when certain panels were repainted, and a couple of little areas where the clear coat has failed or chipped away. So all in all, this car pretty much ticks every box in relation to containing just about every defect imaginable. Next was masking certain plastic and rubber trims to protect them and my polishing pads during the paint correction stage. Now, it's usually around this point in the video that I'd also do a paint thickness measurement and then go on to taking you guys through my testing process to see which pad, compound and technique worked or didn't work to remove the existing defects and restore gloss and clarity to the paint. However, as I discovered only while I started editing this third part video, there's quite a lot of footage missing over the paint correction stage of this detail. So unfortunately, I don't have the footage I took while measuring the paint, and most of the footage during the test sections I did on the bonnet, as well as some other random footage. Trust me, no one's more frustrated about this than me, especially since I have no idea how or why this happened or where the missing footage is. But to put things into perspective, I usually film anywhere from about 8 to 12 hours of footage when making these longer detailing vlogs, even though you guys only see a couple of hours of the finished footage in the end. So all is not lost, as I still have lots of footage to play with, and there's still some great shots showing my process and some good and before and afters. But it's just that it may be a little patchy in a few areas, but I'll do my best to take you through and discuss the process. My starting point was using a medium compound with a foam polishing pad in the form of Shoal Concepts S20 Black and the Lake Country Orange HDO foam pad. Based on the current condition of the paint, there was just next to no chance that a fine polish or fine finishing pad would remove the existing defects. So although you should always start with the least aggressive method, it still has to have the potential to work, or you're just wasting your time. Now, although this first combination was able to remove the lighter swirls, some oxidation, and lighter water spots, as well as improve gloss, it really wasn't able to remove a significant amount of the overall defects. The second combination I tried was again with S20 Black, but this time on the blue HDO light cutting foam pad. In all honesty, the defect removal here wasn't all that much better, and I could also see that the finish had a lot more haze, meaning that this was potentially a more sensitive paint, as well as being a little more difficult to remove the defects. The third test was yet again with S20 Black, but this time using it with the Ripper's yellow wool pad. Now immediately, hopefully you guys can see a lot more haze and micro or compounding marring in the finish, meaning that this pad and combination finished very poorly on this paint. But on the other side of things, the defect removal was much better, removing about 80% of the defects. So I was moving in the right direction, but I still needed more cut if I was going to achieve a high-end finish. Now in the end, after trying a few more combinations on the paint, the best overall result I was able to achieve for the first cutting stage was with Shoal Concepts S2 Black on the Lake Country Blue HDO foam pad. Now there was still a few defects, maybe 5 to 10% I didn't remove, and it certainly still created a bit of compounding haze and marring that would require a second stage of polishing to refine. But overall, it was a fairly great result without having to get too aggressive by using wool or microfiber pads, which was really important based on the amount of predicted clear coat, which I'll talk more about later on. So let's talk a little about technique here. As per usual, I used my smaller polishers to get better and safer correction around the panel edges and intricate areas, and my larger polisher for the larger and flatter areas. As far as machine speed goes, I was using about speed 4 on my larger polisher, but slightly faster speeds on my mini polishers. As for the most part, I find that I do need faster OPM speeds on my smaller polishers, which is also the main reason why smaller polishers have faster rotational speed ranges. Now every polisher from every brand and size is different, as is its power and torque output, so it's hard to generalize speed recommendations. It's more about getting to know your specific machines and letting the results you see guide you in relation to technique. As far as applying pressure to your pads, overall moderate pressure is generally best. Too little pressure and your pad's movement just becomes too erratic, leading to poor cutting and finishing results. So you need a little pressure to contain the pad's motion. But too much pressure and you start creating too much heat that makes the paint more sensitive and even does things like break down your compounding abrasives too quickly, which once again leads to both a decrease in cutting and finishing results. Arm speed and the amount of passes is another important thing. If you move too quickly and do too few passes, you're just not going to get a consistent finish or allow the compounding abrasives to do their job. But move too slowly and do too many passes, and you're going to create too much heat and start to dry out and push your compounds beyond their limits, leading to things like increased dusting, harder wipe-offs, and a reduction in the quality of your results. And the same can be said for trying to work overly large areas at once, that you're just asking too much of your pads and compounds to be able to deliver good results in such extreme conditions. What all good polishing technique comes down to is finding that balance. So don't be afraid to use a little aggression and use higher machine speeds, more pressure and slower arm movements when you need to. But just don't go overboard, and don't think that max speed and pressure means better cut or results, because it doesn't. And what works well on one paint can can work horribly on another, so always do your testing and let your results guide you through. So after cutting back half the bonnet in this first step, my next step was finding a second finishing combination to remove the compounding haze and restore maximum gloss and clarity to the paint. Now, there was another whole testing process here, but I unfortunately don't have that footage, as well as the 50-50 shot I set up for the bonnet. But the combination I ended up using here was the Rupes Fine DA compound on the Lake Country Orange H2O foam pad. I was actually having a lot of issues wiping the panel down without causing any swirl marks, so it's safe to say that it was quite a sensitive paint. And because the Rupes DA Fine compound does have quite a lot of added lubrication, it does actually help a lot to create a more gentle wipe off, and that was the main reason I used it for the bonnet instead of going with something else. I just used my larger polisher to refine the entire bonnet in this second polishing stage because there's less need for using smaller polishers and pads when you're just doing a light enhancement polish. And I dropped my machine speed and pressure down just a touch, which seemed to work extremely well. We'll obviously have a better look at the finished results of the whole car in part 4, but overall, and after a bit of time just working on this half of the bonnet, the black paint really started to come alive with some great overall levels of gloss and saturation. Now, as you guys have a look at the test I did on the roof, I'm just going to talk a little about the paint on this car. If I had the footage of measuring the paint, you guys would have seen that the paint thickness levels were all over the place, being well below 100 microns in some areas and way up to 600 microns in other areas. And based on further inspection, it would appear that the majority of this car has been repainted at various stages throughout its life. Meaning I had about 4 different types of paint on this car to contend with. What I want you guys to realize is that when you start seeing paint thickness readings jump all over the place, and additionally also have very high readings, that's a sign that you need to tread very lightly, as you're most likely dealing with very little clear coat. When a panel is repaired or repainted to a high quality standard, the readings will be fairly consistent and closer to that of OEM paint. But when you see lots of variations and super high readings, it's a sign of fillers, and most likely very little clear coat applied. So all I'm saying is don't be fooled into believing that overly high readings mean more clear coat, as in my experience it's usually the opposite. Good body shop work means more panel beating and less filling, which also tends to mean more clear coat but a lower overall thickness reading. Generally, my goal with paint correction is to get to that 95 to 99% defect removal stage as long as it's safe to do so. But on this car, based on everything I could extract, as far as how much clear coat I had to play with in certain areas, together with the high volume of existing defects and the high potential to burn through the paint, I made a decision to take a step back and aim for a safer and more realistic 90 to 95% defect removal result. I know it may not seem like a lot, but as I've discussed in the past, it's really that last 5 to 10% defect removal that requires the most aggression or cutback in order to reach that level of defect removal. So the first 50% of defects are usually really easy to remove and don't require anything too aggressive to get there. But the last 5 to 10% of defects just require so much more aggression, as those are the really deep ones that you have to go after. Now, that doesn't mean I was afraid to be more aggressive when I needed to, in order to achieve that result when it was safe to do so, as I actually sanded the paint in a few areas, as you'll see later on. It just means that I had to stop treating this car as a whole unit and start treating and adapting to it panel by panel. This is actually the main thing that made this such a time-consuming and hard car to correct, as some of the paint was super soft and sensitive, while other paint was more medium or average hardness, and a couple of the panels, such as the front fenders, had super hard clear-coated finishes. In the end, there really wasn't any way of me getting around that I had to find a different combination of pad, compounds, and even machines every couple of panels, as the paint was responding so differently depending on which panel I was working on. So for instance, with the roof, I had to do 2 passes with the same combination I used on the bonnet to get enough cut. And as you'll see, I wasn't able to finish as well using the same second finishing combination that I used on the bonnet. It's almost like it was harder and softer at the same time. But that was probably due to the roof having a lot more oxidation and water spot etchings than the bonnet. Although I don't have the footage, I ended up switching to my 21mm 6-inch polisher for the roof, worked smaller areas and added a bit more compound to my pad, which helped a lot in the cutting stage. And for the finishing stage, I actually switched to my 12mm 5-inch polisher and also switched to NV finesse polish, which additionally got me there in the end. So all in all, being adaptable and addressing things on the fly is probably a good way of describing how this paint correction process went. There was definitely no shortage of water spots or etchings on the glass, as well as a slight lack of clarity due to a stubborn traffic film that had fused to the glass. Initially I tried using a foam pad to remove the etchings and traffic film, but it was just taking way too long. So in the end I switched to a wool pad using Scholl Concepts S2 Black, which worked extremely well and quick to remove almost all the etchings and that layer of accumulated film to restore some great clarity and transparency to all the vehicle's outer glass. And since I was intending on adding a ceramic coating to the glass, it was really important to get it as clean and bare as possible so that the coating would have the best possible bond to the glass. Now the front fenders actually weren't as bad as the rest of the paint in relation to defects, but they were actually one of the hardest areas to remove the defects due to the harder paint on these panels. I know it may be a little hard to see in the footage, but there were quite a few deeper rids on them that just weren't coming out with my foam pad. I ended up switching to a wool pad, still using Scholl S2 Black for the cutting stage, which seemed to do the trick, and then switched back to my original Ribez DA Fine compound that also worked quite well for the second finishing stage. This panel was the rear left side fender, in which you can clearly see a lot of pigtail machine sanding marks from the body shop, as well as some really deep straight line rids on the top half. Additionally, I could also see a little more orange peel on this panel, meaning that the body shop didn't sand this panel back as much as they should have, which would suggest that there's a little more clear coat here to play with. I used a 2000 grit Cia sanding disc cut up and placed around a small sanding block to lightly wet sand those pigtails and deeper rids with just some water. When sanding by hand, I try not to use any pressure and sand for just a few seconds at a time, but also sand in different directions to treat the defects at all angles, just like a machine polisher. And I also try to stay away from body lines and edges, as it's extremely easy to burn through the clear coat in these more sensitive areas. Now, I also tried compounding the pigtails out on another section of this panel, which really didn't achieve a good result, as generally pigtails are quite difficult to remove. But what it did do is show me that the clear coat on this panel was actually really soft. So I really didn't need to sand very much at all to get most of the rids out due to the softness of the paint. I'll also mention here that this shot took me ages to set up. I know it looks like I just set my camera and a light in front of the panel, but it was extremely difficult getting the right angle, lighting and frame, which then made it equally difficult for me to actually sand and polish the panel at a weird angle. So I hope you guys can forgive me if my technique looks a little awkward in the footage. It's just the logistics of having to deal with making these videos and trying to get good shots. To refine the sanding marks, I used S2 black on a wool pad, which was then followed by S20 black on my foam cutting pad, and because this paint was a little softer and more sensitive, I had to do a third stage with NV Finesse polish on a foam polishing pad to get the best possible finish. The result was by no means perfect, and remember that I had the whole panel with these pigtails on it to complete, but I think it's safe to say that it was at least a 90% improvement, and although I was sweating it a bit, it was also a great and safe result. Out of the 75 hours I spent on detailing this car, over 50 hours was during the paint correction stage. And I know that sounds like a lot because it is a lot, but I'll be honest in saying that I ran out of time and didn't get to do everything I wanted to, or spend quite as much time on certain areas as I could have. So yes, I probably could have spent another 50 hours correcting and refining this vehicle, just because it was definitely a lot of work to get to that end result. Okay guys, so it's getting to that part in the video where I'm going to have to leave you guys and get cracking on editing part 4 and the final chapter of this series, which I really hope you guys stay tuned for. But before I say goodbye, I want to leave you with some words of appreciation and some advice that I hope can help some of you budding detailers entering the profession and starting to put your name, business and work out there on social media, which is exactly what you should be doing to help market yourself. I know it's a new age and many of you guys have learned to detail by watching YouTube videos like these and then practicing on your own, which I think is fantastic. And I do really appreciate all the kind thank you messages and emails. They really make my day. But with this new age of sharing information and putting yourself and your business out there, with just about everyone chiming in, also comes with it some bad actors that don't necessarily have your best interests in mind. All I'm saying is stay focused on what you're doing and trying to achieve. Take good advice on, but also try to identify bad advice and just understand that there's gonna be some miserable people out there that want to bring you down to their level and tell you what you can, can't, should, or shouldn't do. I know it's not always easy to tell, but just ask yourself if the advice or critique I'm getting is coming from someone that wants me to succeed or fail, and are they really trying to help me or just flex their egos? And that's usually a good way of knowing what to take on and what to let go. As always, I really hope you guys enjoyed and found this video useful. Please share this video, like, comment, and subscribe to this channel to show your support for this content, and I'll see you guys soon.
I like my whiskey without a chase. You think that drinking's a sin, but we've been brothers since we were 8. So let's have a toast with tea and gin. I think we're all gonna be okay. You think our time is up. We're all different but still the same. You can say that again. Don't care whatever you are. Everyone's got an opinion. Who am I not to believe them? Although we're different, you're still a friend. Tell myself one man's poison's another man's medicine. A gentleman, each to his own, but be your own man. Although we're different, you're still a friend. Tell myself one man's poison's another man's medicine. One man's medicine. Whoa. Keep your feet on the ground. I like to be up here on the stage, strumming these strings to make a sound. You think the world's bound to fall apart. I think we all need a change of heart. We're all similar, but we're not. Show my hand what you got. Don't care whatever you are.